Okay. And I'm going to be speaking on that passage. You might want to keep it open in front of you if you're the kind of person who takes notes and that kind of stuff. The headings are going to appear on the screen. If you're not, then just sit back and relax and enjoy the journey. I want to start with a question for you, though. How different is church? So think about the rest of your life, the other people you meet, the other kind of stuff that you do. How different is church? Now, I don't mean that there isn't anywhere else, is there, in Britain, apart from at male-dominated team sports events, that you can sing in public without being embarrassed. Some of you are better than the Moldovans in the Eurovision Song Contest. I don't mean that it's only in churches that actually someone standing up and giving a talk is still thought of as a useful thing to do. There's not really anywhere else that happens, is there? Maybe universities. And I don't mean that there's almost nowhere else in Liverpool that you can get free coffee on a Sunday morning. Okay, I'm not talking about those kind of things. I'm talking about the kind of values, the attitudes, the way you go about doing stuff. How different is church? Is the way that church runs very different from how things are done in the shop or the factory or the office or the hospital where you work? Is the way that people in church do stuff very different from the way that your friends who are not Christians do stuff? How different is church? I guess for loads of us, we want to give the answer very different, don't we? Because we know that is the right answer and that's what we ought to say. But quite often, the way we go about doing stuff in church, to our shame, isn't really that different from the way everybody else behaves, is it? A sad truth, isn't it, that churches are not as different as they should be from the rest of the world. The good news from Hosea, and to be honest it's not very good, but the good news is that that's been a problem for God's people for at least 2,500 years. That's as good as it gets, I'm afraid. The bad news, actually is really bad news, is that for the church not to be different, for God's people not to be radically different, totally different, is just utterly disastrous. And in these two chapters, what we see is that the church of that time, the nation of Israel, have become just the same as the world in two massive areas where they really needed to be different. And as a result, when Hosea wrote, they were about to bring God's terrible judgment on themselves. Now the passage, as you may have gathered when Mark read it, doesn't split up neatly into sections. Actually what God does through Hosea is he keeps coming back to a few things again and again and again. So rather than looking at it like verse by verse, one after another, we're going to think about two big ideas, two ways that they failed to be different. If you want to go home and check that they're really there in the passage later on, the verses will appear on the screen so you can go and check them. Firstly, we're going to see that God's church mustn't run on the world's fuel. God's church mustn't run on the world's fuel. So the first place God's people want to be different to the world was the way they dealt with each other. For God's people in Hosea's day, the nation of Israel, that meant they weren't to conduct their politics in the same way all the other nations did. Now, if you think politics in the UK is full of backstabbing and character assassination, you need to be thankful, because 2,500 years ago, in most countries, the backstabbing was actually literal with a knife, and the assassination really happened. The nations of the ancient Near East, where this story is set, were full of violence in their leadership. But Israel wasn't meant to be like that. God has raised up leaders in the past. We heard about Samuel before, didn't we, in the children's talk? He anointed people he chose with wisdom and justice. But by Hosea's day, it had all gone to the dogs. This is the account from the Bible, from the book of Kings, about the kings who were in charge of Israel when Hosea was doing his prophesying. Some of the names are a bit weird, but I hope you'll follow the plot. In the 38th year of Azariah, king of Judah, Zechariah, son of Jeroboam, became king of Israel. He reigned 6 months. Shallum, son of Jabesh, conspired against Zechariah. He attacked him in front of the people, assassinated him, and succeeded him as king. Shallum, son of Jabesh, became king in the 39th year of Uzziah, king of Judah, and he reigned in Samaria 1 month. Then Menahem, son of Gadi, went up from Tirzah to Samaria. He attacked Shallum, son of Jabesh, in Samaria, assassinated him, and succeeded him as king. At that time, Menahem, starting out from Tirzah, attacked everyone in the city and its vicinity because they refused to open their gates to him. He sacked the city and ripped open all the pregnant women. Then Menahem, son of Gadi, became king of Israel, and he reigned 10 years. Then Pul, king of Assyria, invaded the land, and Menahem gave him 1,000 talents of silver. Pekahiah, his son, succeeded him as king, and he reigned 2 years. One of his chief officers, Pekah, son of Remaliah, conspired against him. Taking 50 men of Gilead with him, he assassinated Pekaniah, along with Argob and Ariah. Great names, these people, don't they? In the citadel of the royal palace at Samaria, so Pekah killed Pekahiah and succeeded him as king. In the time of Pekah, king of Israel, Tiglath-Pileser, I think he sounds like a lager. Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, came and invaded the country. He took Gilead and Galilee. Then Hosea, son of Elah, conspired against Pekah, son of Remaliah. He attacked him and assassinated him, and then succeeded him. You get the idea. Okay? They just go around killing their kings all the time. Now you might think, mightn't you, if you just read those verses, or maybe it was just a few really bad leaders, just a handful of people, just the actual leaders themselves. I suppose you might, think about Britain, might you? So think about back a few years, Tony Blair and Gordon. You might get the idea, mightn't you, that they're just two guys who didn't get on very well. But of course the truth is, isn't it, that it's never that simple in real life. There's always people behind the scenes, aren't they? Manipulating and getting their agenda and scheming and plotting. And it was just like that in Hosea's day. And Hosea tells us about that using a brilliant picture of a bread oven. Chapter 7 and verse 4. They're like adulterers, burning like an oven, whose fire the baker need not stir, from the kneading of the dough till it rises. So in ancient Israel, obviously everyone baked their own bread, generally, and normally you'd have if you lived in the country, you'd have a little bread oven at home. But if you lived in a city, that was a bit inconvenient because there'd be all these fires going on everywhere. So they tended to have massive bread ovens that everybody would share. And you can still go and see them today. They're kind of, some of them are almost as high as this building, and they're kind of like big round things. And what happened is you'd light a massive fire in the bottom, and you'd take a little stopper out the chimney at the top, and you'd heat the whole thing up until all the bricks were absolutely red hot. And then when the fire had gone down to the ashes, so things like, cooking marshmallows on a fire or something like that, okay, doing a barbecue. When the fire had gone down to the ashes and everything was red hot, you'd get the bits of dough and you'd slap them on the walls of the oven. Okay, and that's how they cook. So they'd be kind of fastened to the walls because the dough was wet. And that is what the politics of their nations become, Hosea says. That's how they're dealing with each other. They're like a hot oven full of sin and wickedness. The high-powered people, they approach the king with intrigue. They stay up, according to verse 6, they stay up all night plotting and scheming and planning. And in the morning they burst forth into flame as they spin and manipulate and kill to advance their man, their scheme, their self-interest. The atmosphere doesn't help those. Drink-sodden politics. Apparently on the anniversary of his coronation, according to verse 5, the king gets so leathered that he can't decide whose wife to listen to or not. So he ends up hugging the pagans. You can imagine, you're a great guy, I really love you. Telling them, these guys who believe in a different God, how wonderful they are. And his advisors, who ought to be, stopping him making foolish alliances and doing stupid stuff, well, they're too busy in smoke-filled rooms determining their next political move to help the king. And the next king will be no better, according to chapter 8 and verse 4. He'll be set up without God's consent, chosen without God's approval. The next king, too, will endorse the new national religion, the wicked idols of bulls that the Israelites weren't meant to have. According to verse 11 of chapter 8, he too is going to approve the system of lots of different altars. That was in direct contradiction to what God had said, that there should be one altar in Jerusalem. According to verse 13 of chapter 8, the new king will preside over a people who are so ignorant of God's law, which was meant to be the constitution of their country, that it will sound to them like it's a document from somewhere else, an alien idea. Be completely clueless. It'll be like a bunch of people who, England fans who get to football matches and have no idea what the words to God Save the Queen are. They'll be like, is that the national anthem of France? So that's how ignorant they're going to be about God's law. Do you see the problem? You see, the people of God are running their affairs, they're running the church just like the rest of the world does. That's what they're doing. What's the result? Well, it's summed up in chapter 8 and verse 7, a little phrase. They sow the wind and reap the whirlwind. Now, in the days when you had to sow your seed by hand, no tractors and stuff, it was actually really useful to do it on a day when there was a good breeze, because the breeze would help to spread the seeds out. So sowing to the wind is generally a wise thing to do. There's a little pun going on here in Hosea, because wind can also mean folly or stupidity, just like it can when we call someone a windbag. Okay? So what they're saying is, Hosea saying, listen, you're sowing to stupidity. You're sowing to folly. You're sowing to being just like everybody else. So what's going to happen? What you're going to get in return? Whirlwind, tornado, destruction. Can you imagine how frightening a tornado or a whirlwind must have been when most homes were built out of mud bricks and pieces of wood? It's been terrifying, hasn't it? But the result of running their church just like the rest of the world was that they'd get a just reward. They'd become just like the rest of the world. If they gained power as the king by the sword, what would happen? They'd die by the sword. You sow the wind, you reap the whirlwind. So what about us then? What will it mean for us not to run on the world's fuel? And what will happen if we do? Well, there's loads of places where you could go in the Bible to spell that out. I'm just going to choose one and focus on just a couple of applications as to how this might work for us. They'll be on the screen, but you probably don't need to turn them up. We're going quite fast. You can look them up at home later if you want to. So the first one is, what does that mean for us? Well, the first thing is the world runs on cliques, and we mustn't. The world runs on cliques, and we mustn't. Imagine that somebody, in the world was deciding the preaching program for your church, and who gets to preach. And you've got a bunch of people, and then maybe they're sitting around deciding who gets to talk on Sunday mornings. Well, I guess for most people, wouldn't it, the key issue would be, which leader do you like best? Is it Steve or John? Is it Cosh or Matt? Who is it? Who do you like best? But that shouldn't be how it works in the church, should it? See, if you sow to the wind like that, what you'll do is you'll reap a whirlwind. See, if you treat your leaders like they're my favourite, they're my hero, well, they'll end up lording it over you, won't they? Exploiting you. I hope when you do things as a church, you don't just let everybody decide what they want to do. So, maybe you've got a problem and you want to talk to one of the church leaders. I hope the church leaders don't just let you decide who you want to talk to because you want to talk to the person you think will give you the answer you want to hear. We find that quite often happens at our church. People go, I want to talk about it, but I only want to talk to Jeremy. And I'll go, well, no, you actually, Nick's free. Don't talk to Nick. Because we don't want people to think they can just choose what they want to hear. And the temptation for leaders, isn't it, is to create a little power base in the church. You give the people around them who they're just like, they do what they want to do. And the temptation for you is to try and divide your leaders to get your own way. Well, it shouldn't be like that in the church. The world runs on cliques and we mustn't. Secondly, the world runs on consumerism and we mustn't. The world runs on consumerism and we mustn't. If you either went and joined the local Labour Party or something, you wanted to be a candidate for the council, I don't know why you'd want to do that, but anyway, let's imagine that you did, you were mad enough to do that. And all that you ever got to do was stick leaflets through doors on the estate round here and get your finger bitten by the dogs. Well, eventually you'd just leave and go somewhere else, wouldn't you? I'm not getting to do what I want to do. It's tempting to bring that attitude to church, isn't it? I decide what my gifts are, and if I can't use the gift that I want to use, then the church must be suppressing me, so I'm going to go somewhere else. The trouble is, if you think that, you've got everything the wrong way round. Just like the kings and the courtiers in Hosea's day. You see, they thought the nation was given to them so they could get wealth and power. We think the church is given to us so we can find fulfillment and significance. But the reality is that you have been given to the church to build other people up. By exhausting yourself, by giving yourself in service to do anything that you are capable of doing that needs doing. And what happens if we don't do that? Well, what will happen is that the leaders will just do the bits of the work that they want. They'll preach nice sermons maybe, but they'll never go and challenge anyone about their sin because that's a bit uncomfortable and we don't really want to do that. And the church members will be great at doing the jobs people want to do, but no one will do the things that don't fulfill anyone. No one will empty the bins on a Sunday or take down the banners or look after the babies at the church weekend or give money or welcome the kind of new people who just don't quite fit in. And then the church will die. This world runs on consumerism, and we mustn't. Thirdly, the world runs on strength, and we mustn't. The world runs on strength, and we mustn't. We recently started a church plant at Christchurch, sent a bunch of people away. And humanly speaking, we was thinking, it's mad, isn't it? We took 20 of our keenest, most committed people and sent them off to start another church. Not a branch of our church, so we can have like a sort of Starbucks empire across the city. But a completely new church that's going to run itself, it's going to be independent, that people will go to who might otherwise have come to our church. That's mad, isn't it? And of course, that's what the guys at Bridge Chapel did a few years ago, and a group of people left to come here. It's what we've just done. And our church was smaller when those people left, and it was weaker, and it was less. No, Will says that's a mad strategy. Because we don't get anything from it. It's not what the kings of ancient Israel did, and it's not what the builders of international ministries today do. You can go on their websites on the internet and find out. They're all about consolidating power, pooling resources, bringing it all together. But that's how the world runs. It's not how the church should run. So the way we deal with each other in the family of the church, the way we choose our leaders, the way we run our meetings, we mustn't run on the world's fuel. But secondly, God's church mustn't fight with the world's weapons. God's church mustn't fight with the world's weapons. So the second place we should be different isn't just in our dealings with each other, but in our dealings with everybody else in the world. So we're not meant to secure our place in the world in the same way as any other organisation does, or a business does, or a school does, or a hospital does. Now, for God's people in Hosea's day, what that meant was that they weren't to do their international politics the same way the nations around them did. Basically, what happened in international politics then was just the same as what happens now. There's a few really powerful countries in the world, then like now. And every other country then picks one of those most powerful countries to be kind of on side with. And they got that nation's protection and weapons in return for, I don't know, allowing army bases or sharing intelligence or joining wars on terror or whatever it was. Now in Hosea's day, there's two really powerful countries. One was Egypt and one was Assyria. They were the big boys. And basically, countries decided you go with one or you go with the other. And it was an international protection racket. You pay them shed loads of money, they don't invade you. That was what was going on. Trouble for Israel was that they shouldn't have been doing that. Because God had told them not to. God had said, I'm your protector, I'm your warrior, I'm your leader. You don't need to do this. Stop it. The second problem, though, is that once they disobeyed God and done that and made alliances with these people, they couldn't actually make up their mind whose side they wanted to be on. They, according to chapter 7, verse 8, mixed with all the nations. They were flip-flopping, as the jargon has it. And what happened was that they paid so much money out to other countries that it sapped all the strength and money out of their country. But they haven't even noticed. There's a wonderful line in chapter 7, verse 8, verse 9. His hair is sprinkled with grey, but he doesn't notice. In other words, listen to how it says, Israel's like a bloke who thinks he's in his prime, but, there's quite a receding hairline going on there, and there's, quite a lot of grey, and they haven't realised. Anyone who looks carefully can tell it's, getting on a bit. Israel's like a dove, verse 11. Now we think, dove, lovely. Lovely dove, symbol of purity. Somebody's put on a rainbow guitar strap. But a dove is not just a symbol of purity, it's sometimes that in the Bible, but it's also a symbol of stupidity or daftness or indecisiveness. Maybe we'd be better saying they're pigeon-brained. That might give you an idea. 1 minute they're turning to Egypt for assistance, 1 minute they're turning to it back, they go anywhere apart from God. They claim to know God, but the reality is, according to chapter 8, verse 1, they've rejected his covenant, they've rebelled against the law, they've turned away from what is good. What's the result? What's going to happen? Well, if they want to play international politics with the big boys, God says, I'll let you. And then you'll find out just what a minnow you really are, Israel. What's going to happen? You're going to be swallowed up without a trace. They want to play international politics. They're going to go right back to where they started, being a no nation, just a bunch of slaves. So what about us? What will it mean for us not to fight with the world's weapons? Well, again, loads of places you could go in the New Testament to help us think about what that looks like. But let me just give you two examples. Again, Bible references on the screen, look them up later if you want to. The world believes in hedging its bets, and we mustn't. The world believes in hedging its bets, and we mustn't. So the problem they had in Israel is they couldn't decide who was going to win. Whether it was going to be Egypt or whether it was going to be Assyria. So they constantly tried to play one off against the other in the hope that they'd pick good and be on the winning side. But all of them have forgotten the most obvious thing in the Bible. Most obvious thing in the Bible? God wins. The only way to be on the winning side in the conflict between good and evil in the world is to be on God's side. To listen to His word, to do what He says. And I think we can be just like Israel in our dealings with our friends. See, we're not properly convinced that God wins. So we don't live as if He's the only thing that matters, and as if the only thing that matters for our friends is that they know who Jesus is and that He's coming back again. So, we tiptoe around, don't we? Talk about spiritual things if we're pushed. But, we never really challenge our friends about Jesus. Say, listen, you've got to believe in Him or you're going to die. Now, the excuse we give is, we wouldn't want to jeopardize the relationship. I wouldn't want to put them off so they don't talk to me anymore. But what kind of friendship is it if the friendship stays really good and our friend dies without knowing about Jesus? Will they be really thankful that we never told them? I suspect they won't. See, Israel needed to throw their lot in with God. They need to say, listen, we're God's people. Whatever the consequences, knowing that God wins in the end. And we need to do the same. Secondly and lastly, the world tells people what they want to hear. And we mustn't do that. The world tells people what they want to hear. And we mustn't. The most obvious way in which churches in the last 100 years or more have kind of given in to the same sins as Israel is just telling people what they want to hear, isn't it? Israel was determined to look like everyone else, and I think that's what the church is like quite often, isn't it? Sometimes the church kind of gets into bed with science, doesn't it, and pretends, the miracles of the Bible, they're just stories, very shallow seas that you can walk on little boys sharing their picnics so that everyone else gets their adventure. We kind of played really miracles, Sometimes the church kind of goes all arty-farty, doesn't it? And it's, yes, you can really meaningfully encounter God in a labyrinth or an anointed worship experience, and you just kind of let yourself go, or you can go to some, far-off piece of seaside and just stare at the beach and you'll find God there. What a load of rubbish. But that's what speakers who want to be popular have done for thousands of years, isn't it? They soften up all the difficult bits, and they go to town on the bits that people go, I can relate to that. Anything to get the punters in. There's loads of things you could promise, can't you, to the people that live in Speak that would make this place fuller on a Sunday morning. Sure, there's some things you could tell your friends about being a Christian that would make them want to become a Christian and come along. The trouble is that lots of those things just wouldn't be true. Don't fight with the world's weapons. Don't make the Christian life sound as amazing as you can and get people to sign on the dotted line before they discover the truth, which is that being a Christian is really hard quite a lot of the time. The world tells people what they want to hear. We mustn't do that. We've just got to tell them the truth. How different is church? Well, if your church is like mine, the answer is not as different as it should be. Both in our dealings with each other and our dealings with the world, we're called to be radically different. And the fate of Israel and what happened to it, which is that it was wiped off the map by God's judgment, stands as a testimony to a church, to your church, to any church, that doesn't heed the warning. Why don't we pray together? Heavenly Father, thank you so much that you've given us the example of Israel to show us what not to be like. To show us what happens when God's people behave just like the world around us. When we don't really trust you, when we don't really think that you are the answer, and we start behaving like other people. Please help us not to do that. Please help us in our conversation with our friends, not to be just like everyone else, just to talk about the same things that everyone else does, but to talk about the Lord Jesus. Please help us in the way we run our church, not to be like everyone else, not to be all about how I can get what I want, but about how I can serve others to bring glory to you. In Jesus' name, amen.
song, just use it as a response to talk to God about those things where we fail, and give His strength to give us all that we need to live for Him, live differently, by the power of His Spirit. We sing all the songs out here, saying about how you used to be before you was a Christian, the things you used to live for, and really at the end of the day, what are the things you used to live for? And actually, Jesus is the one who is the real life, who is the Lord, who is true, who is everything we need. Okay, so we sing that too.